Hello everyone, and welcome back to Poképaint, the series where I draw new Pokémon to populate my fan-made Pokémon region based on Florida. In the Pokémon series, there's a lot of common reoccurrences when it comes to each region's Pokédex. There's an early bird Pokémon, an early route rodent, the regional rock, the fossils, etc. The first of these regional or early route Pokémon when it comes to the Kanto Pokédex is Caterpie, the Kanto region's very own early route bug. So that's what we'll be tackling today. Early route bug Pokemon, unlike some of the other reoccurring mons, is a very important category when it comes to game design for the Pokemon series, as each region introduces you to its Pokemon world through a few weaker and easy to deal with monsters that teach you something about the game and its mechanics. When it comes to the regional bug, they usually serve to teach the player about Pokemon evolution, evolving early into a second and usually third stage, though people don't usually keep their regional bugs around for their whole journey, as their base stat total is usually pretty low for the endgame. They're often used as more powerful final form Pokemon to help deal with the early gyms. My regional bug will be slightly different in concept than the others. Instead of teaching about linear level up evolution like the others, mine would teach players about a different type of Pokemon evolution in branching evolutions. Instead of evolving into a second and third stage, my root bug would have the option to evolve into one of 3 different forms. Though teaching new players about the most common type of evolution is still rather important, I'll probably use another early root Pokemon, or even an existing bug Pokemon that might fit into the Florida region, like Weedle or Kricketot, to communicate that idea. My concept for the early bug centered around the idea of a fire ant, an insect that is synonymous with Florida, as there's an entire species of fire ant named after the state it's found in, the Florida fire ant. The evolution line is based on how a single ant colony's individual drones will experience something called specialization, where their bodies will grow differently from one another depending on the role that they play in their colony. And although all the ants in a colony might be the same species, they might look very different based on their adaptation. The actual look of this Pokemon popped into my head super easily, and I actually only went through one draft until I found my final design. I had this idea of this Pokemon that would not only have the powers associated with fire ants, like a burning sting, super strength, etc., but they'd also fill another ant stereotype in being the smallest Pokemon to date, coming in at half the height of Flabébé at 2 inches tall, the shortest main series Pokemon to date. I rounded the feet and ear-like antenna to illustrate this size idea with an almost chibi look, and I gave it these semi-transparent mandibles with glowing fire energy inside of them to communicate the biting power that this Pokemon has. As even though fire ants in real life don't bite you, rather they sting you, it's a common misconception that the burning sting comes from these bites. The name would photonically sound similar to the words fire ant, but it would be a combination of pyro and fire ant, getting the f sound with a ph instead of an f. Phyrant, the fire ant Pokemon. Phyrant is the smallest Pokemon to have been discovered to date. In the wild, they build 4 to 8 feet tall dirt hills that stretch miles under the ground. In these mounds, hundreds of Phyrant and their specialized evolutions serve a single female queen. If a Phyrant colony is disturbed, the opponent will be swarmed with hundreds of little soldiers, and they are inflicted with painful Fire Fang attacks. This bite is famously painful and originates from the flammable fuel that they store in their mandibles. So here is Phyrant, the early route bug Pokemon for this region. When it came to making its evolutions, I of course had the theme of specialization in mind. Although I didn't choose animals in the fire ant category to inspire its evolutions, I did choose other well-known species that could be adapted in the context of a fantastical setting to be an offshoot of the same creature, as the Pokemon world has never fully been reliant on real-world biology. The first branch in the evolution chart for Phyrant would be the army ant-inspired evolution, and it would play a specialized role of defending its colony from attackers. It took me a few drafts to design this evolution, but once I settled on a design, it quickly became one of my absolute favorite Pokemon of Season 3. It might actually be my favorite that I've done so far. I looked at reference of army ants and observed their massive mandibles and thought that I'd redesigned them to look like a bushy mustache, something that a stereotypical 50s drill sergeant might have. I also gave it a crazy fire hand cannon, reinterpreting the word fire in fire ant as firing a weapon of some sort. Not only were the mandibles stylized, but so were their antennae, as I posed them in such a way to look like big, angry eyebrows. When it came to colors, I wanted each of these evolutions to have slightly different color palettes, so I used the color patterns of real-life army ants that get darker with each segment as you go down their body. Privant, the army ant Pokemon, and the evolved form of Phyrant. A specialized member of a Phyrant colony, Privant are the stalwart defenders of their communities. Scientists observed that they organize themselves into full army groups with subdivisions of 10 to 12 individuals. These subdivisions switch out every hour on the hour to patrol their lands 24/7. Though small, they are unfathomably strong, able to lift multiple times their own body weight. They chew combustible minerals with their massive mandibles to create fuel for their hand cannon-like organ on their front right limb. They are incredible marksmen and never miss. Each of these Pokemon's names are sort of ant puns in the way that their name sounds like a word that describes their role, but is misspelled in a way to include the word ant. Privant is a private in an army, and Archetant is the architect of Phyrant colonies. It is based conceptually on carpenter ants, mostly only in name, however. And this is the only one of the evolutions not to keep the fire type, shifting to ground to illustrate its turn from a more overtly offensive adaptation. I wanted to illustrate that shift in typing in its color palette, so I strayed away from using the vibrant reds of the other forms and went with the more desaturated colors found in the others. Carpenter ants, though the main one, were not the only inspiration for this concept. I also took a lot of visual inspiration from the door-headed ant, a type of ant that uses their bodies as a building material of sorts, using their wide heads to block the entrances to their colonies when they're under attack. This served to further influence the more defensive-minded nature of this Pokemon, and also let me stylize this head adaptation as a hat-like brim, giving this Pokemon more personality. I also imagine that this hat, if you want to call it that, may serve a bunch of in-universe roles. Maybe it uses the flat surface as a platform to lift heavy objects, or as a space to mix materials on, or even as a shield in combat. Archetant, the carpenter ant Pokemon, and the evolved form of Phyrant. These specialized drones are responsible for the building of the 4 to 8 feet tall mounds that Phyrant colonies live in. They are proportionally the strongest of all the evolutions of Phyrant, but lack the raw attacking power of the other two. They use this strength to lift large rocks and building materials that they rest on the disc-shaped protuberance on the top of their head. Construction workers will often keep Archetant on hand for not only their strength and ability to navigate in tight spaces, but also because of their inherent knack for building some of the world's most sturdy structures. They create a cement-like paste by spitting up partially digested rocks that it has superheated in its abdomen. The final Phyrant branched evolution would be the Pokemon Tyranant, a portmanteau of tyrant and ant. It's based on, you guessed it, the concept of a queen ant. When I was a kid, I briefly had this misconception that the ants with wings were the queens and the ants without wings were the drones, though I was of course wrong, as the winged ants I was seeing were actually a certain species of carpenter ant, funnily enough. I still remember telling my little brother this untrue fact with such confidence that we both believed it for a short amount of time. Using that memory, I gave my queen ant wings, as I always associate queen ants with them, even though many of them don't have wings. I stylized these wings to look like a royal cape, and I gave them the pattern of a painted glass window to really give this Pokemon a more over-designed, elegant edge to differentiate it from the other three in the line. I also posed the antenna into the shape of a royal crown. Usually my shiny Pokemon are a bit of an afterthought, But with this region, I've been putting a lot of effort into fully thinking out each shiny. With this line, I'm sure you've noticed by now, but I've been giving them all black shinies based around the idea that other species of ants are primarily black in color, which are actually the more common type of ant where I'm from. And I think the black shinies for all of them, particularly Tyranant, are really sleek looking. And were this a real game, I'd probably even shiny hunt Tyranant, as although it's not my favorite of the line, its shiny just looks so cool. Tyranant, the Monarch Pokemon, and the evolved form of Phyrant. Exceptionally rare in the wild, a Phyrant will evolve into a Tyranant when it levels up holding a jar of royal honey. They act as the leaders of Phyrant colonies, and there is only one per Phyrant mound. If there is ever two, they will battle for the rights to the kingdom, and the loser will be banished into the wild. They rarely ever battle with outsiders, only to defend their homes against attackers. During battle, they can inflict a painful burn that is said to sting for days. So here is the 3-way branched evolution for my early root bug Pokemon. Yes, I think it's a little crazy for a concept that the official Pokemon company would use for any of their regions, at least for the early Pokemon, but I think mine still feels like an interesting early bug. This episode in particular was really fun to make, as when I was a kid I had a huge obsession with ants. I kind of went crazy with it. I just thought they were absolutely fascinating. I had these window-sided ant colonies that you can get where you can see inside of them, and I remember watching my colonies at breakfast before elementary school every day. My favorite movie/children's book for a while was The Ant Bully, if anybody remembers that. Oh yeah, that's a John Machine childhood staple right there. Anyways, getting to represent all of these different types of ants in one evolutionary line was almost like a blast from the past, and I think if these were existing Pokemon back in 2008, they might have been a childhood favorite of mine. A few things before I go. I'm sure you can all tell at this point that this season of Poképaint will be a little less story-driven at the beginning of the season than Season 2 was. Don't get me wrong, I'm still going to tell you the entire story of the region. I'm just going to separate it into more concentrated and well thought out sections later on in the series so that I have more room for just designing Pokemon. I also haven't settled on a name for the Florida-based region yet. There's a few really great names that I've heard in the comments, one that I might actually go with, but I wanted to give you all one more week to get the chance to submit your idea for a name. Next time, I'll be finishing the Route 1 category of Pokemon with the regional bird and the regional rodent, so stay tuned for that. And if you enjoyed this video, then leave a like. If you want to see more like it, then feel free to subscribe, and turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.